Hi, I am Susan Poteat, and I know some of you from the Smart Patients Forum. I recently met Nicholson at the International Kidney Cancer Coalition meeting, and as I got to know him, I was excited to learn that the Judy Nicholson Foundation is now working on a clinical trial initiative. This is something my husband and I are passionate about. We've spent a lot of time in the last 10 years educating and reaching out to others about clinical trials for kidney cancer. Only about 3% of cancer patients ever participate in a trial, where about 50% say they'd be interested. So we want to talk about what it's like to be in a trial, and this is a new way for us to do it. We've never done a Facebook Live. We're excited to be here. And this is Gary. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Gary Poteat. The 9th of November this year will be the 10th anniversary of my diagnosis with widely metastatic renal carcinoma. With 2 bone mets and too many lung mets to count, I wasn't expected to live but about a year. The reasons I'm still alive today and doing well are many. However, one reason is that I've gotten access to novel therapies through clinical trials. I began my first clinical trial, a phase 3 combo of a vaccine and a standard drug, on my first day of treatment in January 2008. Every time a change has been required in my treatment, and there have been many, we've always considered a clinical trial as one of my options. I've participated in 5 clinical trials, including 1 phase 3 and 2 phase 1 drug trials. I've applied for and been rejected from about a half a dozen other trials, and I've researched too many to count. I believe every patient should consider clinical trials if it fits with their treatment needs, for their own benefit and to help improve treatments for kidney cancer.
So we're going to start out with some questions. The first one we've got is, tell about our experiences with clinical trials, and depending on what phase of clinical trial you're doing, it's a very different experience. The very first one we did was a phase 3, which is the last stage before FDA approval. It's done by lots and lots of oncologists all over the country. And Gary's, as he said, his very first day of treatment, we sought out a doctor who offered a clinical trial. And you want to talk a little bit about just how treatment under a phase 3 clinical trial was compared to just going to an oncologist?
Well, really, my first clinical trial experience was hardly noticeable. I went in for my regular visits, saw my doctor, got my regular treatments, and then they gave me an injection. I sat in the room for a little while, and then I went home. So that one was very easy. It was local, and it really didn't change how I was treated, hardly at all.
Yeah, I would say the one thing about them is you have a research trial nurse who's very involved with your care, answers all your calls and things very quickly. You may feel like you actually have a higher level of care. You know, on the other end of the spectrum, Gary was the very first kidney cancer patient to get a drug inpatient at NIH in Washington, Bethesda. And that was very different, very intense.
Right. I mean, obviously, phase 1 trials are safety trials, and that's their main purpose. And so usually very few, or maybe as in my case, there have been 5 melanoma patients received the drug before I did. So when you're one of the first patients to ever receive a drug, they don't really know what will happen. So you're watched very closely, you're monitored, obviously, very closely, and it's a little bit more intense. And in that trial, the one Susan mentioned at NIH, I was actually an inpatient for the whole time I was receiving the trial drug.
It was a pretty intense
It was,
experience.
very much so.
Yeah.
Very emotional too.
And another question I had here that kind of relates, and we can use those two examples, is was the trial experience different than you expected? And if you've never done one, I promise you it will be different. One thing I'm not sure I can convey this, but I didn't really realize was, how closely they watch you, how long the follow-up goes for. No, they won't mail the drugs to your local CVS. No, you can't get your blood done at home. So, see, we can't see the detail here, but you can see this is a trial schedule. There are a lot of little blocks on there for things that are testing. So I've learned to ask for the trial schedule up front when we start to talk to people, because you really have to figure out if you can fit it in your life. How are things compared to what you expected?
Well, I think one thing you do have to understand if you're participating in a clinical trial, that you partly are a patient, but you're also partly a research subject. And they have very strict rules. To get good science out of the clinical trial, they have to do it a certain way. And you have to conform to the requirements of the clinical trial.
In other words, they can't really clinically manage you.
Exactly. You have to follow the protocol, as they call it. And so it's very important for you to understand what the requirements of the trial are before you start. And make sure that you are both willing and able to do that. For example, another phase 1 trial I flew every week for a month, and then switched to every other week for 5 more months, flying across the country to get the trial drug infused. It was expensive, of course, very tiring. I was working at the time, and it's a real grind, but I did complete the trial and made all my appointments, but it's hard work. And you need to understand that and be able to commit to that before you start the trial.
Yeah, I had some conversations with Scott and also with Nick, and one thing I emphasized that I don't think we realized at first is how important location is because of the number of trips on the trial. So I write a lot about clinical trials. Gary talks to patients on the phone about clinical trials. I say location is the number one thing you should look at. So, yeah, before you start setting your heart on something in New York or Denmark, look and see what's in your area. Like the North Florida area, you have both Moffitt and Mayo offering a significant number of clinical trials. So those are the ones your doctor is familiar with, and it's much more doable to stay with it over the long run.
Right, and one thing I'd point out is that phase 3 trials in general are much more widely available. There are many more sites. Phase 1 trials, because it's early in the drug's use and because of the risk and seriousness of that particular trial, are usually only in very large research centers. Mm-hmm. So you need to take that into account. Currently, I'm only qualified for phase 1 trials. I've had so many different treatments that the phase 3 trials just don't want a patient like me. So if you're interested in participating in clinical trials, don't wait too long. Start looking at them early in your treatment and see when they fit in, because the phase 3 trials, which obviously are the ones with the most information and probably the ones that are most exciting, are going to need to be done pretty early in your treatment.
Yeah. And while you're healthy enough to travel, I think it's important too. But, one thing Gary said when we started off that I want to emphasize again is don't think of them as a Hail Mary pass for when you're out of choices, because by then you will not qualify for any of the trials.
Right.
Every time you need to change drugs, that's the time to think about it. And sometimes you won't want, it doesn't make sense to do a trial.
Right.
But that's the time to think about it. And I saw we got a comment from Doreen I'm going to share. She was saying this was important information, and thanks for us letting,
happy to do it.
yeah, we are happy to do it. And I am going to give smartpatients.com a plug here. There are over 1,000 kidney cancer patients who post on there every month. So if you want to talk to some other people who might have been in a trial that you're interested in, you're going to find a lot of people like us there. Okay, so how would the Northern Florida patients find a trial?
Susan's the expert on finding trials. She's found all mine, so I'll let her answer that one.
First thing to do is talk to your doctor. That's how you're going to find the local trials. And Gary, when we travel for work, so we have more than the normal number of oncologists in our history. But we let him know early. He's a trial guy. And, then if they've heard of something promising or they have something promising, like this little stack here, our doctor just handed us when it was time for Gary to have a drug change because it was a trial he had open. Oh, this is backwards. Right. And he just wanted us to know that it was there.
Of course, there are also websites.
Cancer.gov's my favorite.
Cancer.gov, and actually on Smart Patients, they've started trying to do some work with clinical trials.
Yeah, and there's an organization it's funded by the drug companies, but it's called emergingmeds.com. It was started by a physician's wife, and they don't have any special knowledge of kidney cancer, but they have a navigator who'll kind of walk you through it. So they actually, I think they more than double the people who actually enroll in a trial because they know how all the red tape works.
Right, and if you happen to go to a larger medical center or especially a training center, university type hospital, they'll have trial coordinators that can also help you look at various trials and understand the requirements.
Your doctor's research nurse.
Right.
Yeah.
That type of thing.
And finally, if you found something on the internet that you're interested in, maybe 2 or 3 it looks like you're eligible for, you call them, you talk to the research nurse, sounds like a maybe, then you put all those in a pile and you take them in and talk to your oncologist about them because you want to make sure it's good medicine. In fact, I'll let Gary go. Do you want to talk through the story about what happened just recently? We had a trial picked out, and then we got scan results, and it was the good medicine question.
Well, yes, I've been accepted in a clinical trial. We signed the consent form. I was supposed to get the first dose of the drug, and it was, again, a combo trial with a standard treatment plus a novel agent. And I had to get a scan as part of my workup for the trial, and my response to a drug I'd been on for just a short time was so good that my doctor said, I really think you should stick with the drug you're on. So that would have been my 6th clinical trial, and I was ready to go with it, but we decided to stay on my current drug treatment. So it is something you need to work with your doctor on, get advice on, but you'll end up making the decision. My doctor said I could take the clinical trial or I could continue on current drug, and I chose the current drug.
So, yeah.
Make it part of your plan. Clinical trials are important to all patients, and I think it's something we should do as patients, but your care comes first, so it should fit in with your clinical needs.
Right, absolutely. I have a question, gosh, if there's something, say a wonderful immunotherapy trial, New York or Boston, is that possible? And as Gary was talking about enrolling in a trial at Johns Hopkins, it is possible. Usually the place to start is talking to the research nurse. You go on cancer.gov, their research nurse will be great about talking to you. talking to your own doctor about whether that makes sense in your care plan.
Finding out how many times you have to go,
Right.
how long you have to stay, can you afford the travel cost, if you're still working, can you get off work for that?
Right.
So there's a lot of aspects to it, but yes, you can. I flew from Tallahassee to Baltimore about 16 times, and it can be done. It's pretty difficult, but I was fortunate to be able to do it. So certainly that's possible, but look into it and make sure that you're ready to take that on, because I was tired of it by the time I got that.
Yeah. And yeah, most people don't really realize when they start a trial, most of them run for up to 2 years. So if you're doing well, you go and you go and you go again.
Right.
And it goes on for a really long time.
Right.
So that asking for that schedule early is a good thing. Here's another one, the questions. If, maybe you read a news article about a clinical trial, how do you know if you're eligible? We're good. There are eligibility criteria that you can get from that research nurse. But I think the Judy Nicholson Foundation wants to set up some lists and some online tools so you can find some of the trials in your area and see who to contact. So I think that's a great idea and will be very helpful.
One thing to understand is that the eligibility requirements are written in medical language, so you may need some help interpreting. And
Right.
the research nurse and your doctor can help you with that.
Right. And smart patients, too. We
Right.
help people with that.
So don't be surprised if you look at the consent form and the eligibility requirements and it seems a little overwhelming. There are people who will help you work through that.
Yeah. And, I've heard this question, will my doctor be upset? Am I going to hurt his feelings if I ask about a trial somewhere else?
That's not been my experience at all.
Not at all.
So I would say no.
In fact, most of the doctors, especially the ones who specialize in disease, are just, they know what the need is. It is
Right.
so hard to get, now that we have more drugs, it is so hard to get kidney cancer patients to participate in trials and keep moving that science forward.
And it's very important. So
It
I think
is.
your doctor will support you.
So, yeah, don't feel at all shy about asking about that or asking him to look for one for you. How do I find out if medically it's a good idea for me? I think it's just like changing from, say, a TKI to an mTOR. It's something you talk about with your doctor
Right.
and look at your own history.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're looking at early stage trials, like phase 1 trials that I've done a couple of, and would have started a third one last week if it hadn't worked out differently. There's no published human data.
Right.
So it's hard to know.
Absolutely.
So talk with your doctor. We always read the research. That's kind of hard to do, but we have the background that allows us to do that. So mainly talking with your doctor and reading all you can about the new drug and to see if it sounds interesting. And every drug I've ever taken has been a leap of faith, and it is with clinical trial drugs as well.
Yeah. I've got a comment over here on from another patient, somebody I know from Smart Patients. Hi, Merlinda. She commented how great it was to work with a research nurse, and we've found that over and
Yes.
over is that they add a personal touch. And I don't think we've really said, when you participate in a clinical trial, especially a phase 1 or 2, you get to know some of the top researchers very well. And, it's been touching and amazing to us. Gary hasn't seen Dr. Hummers as a patient in 2 years now, probably. And
Almost 3.
yeah, and, he always answers my emails, just like we still see him, and
Right.
It's really special. You know, they know that you've gone out of their way, and they go out of their own way to help you.
Right.
So,
Most of the people that you come in contact with when you're on a clinical trial appreciate what you're doing and care about you, and that is very much like your doctor or nurse-patient relationship that you have. But you do have to understand there's also very strict rules in the protocol, and sometimes they can't bend them for you. So they do care about you, but they also have to follow the protocol of the trial.
Yeah, but if you need to leave because you need to leave,
Right.
you will never get any grief over it. You
That's
will
right.
never get any pressure over it.
Right. One thing to
So-
remember is that you are in the trial as long as you choose to be. You can step out of the trial at any
Absolutely.
time.
Absolutely. So, I guess I don't think we have any new questions. We have been looking for trials for Gary and others for almost a decade. It's a pretty rare week on smartpatients.com that I don't reach out and comment on trials. There's a big learning curve as Judy and Nicholson develops their trial initiative. Hope I'll be able to help some of you learn to find trials. But I think, you know, here in closing for me and Gary to say how important we think this is. When Gary's dad was diagnosed with the same cancer, he only lived a couple of months. And like Gary said, we only expected him to live for a year. And here we are a decade later. And there was only Nexavar and Sutent when really, and now we have 8 or 10 drugs, and we couldn't do it without clinical trials.
Absolutely. I'm on my second go-round on Sutent. First time, it took out pretty much everything that I had. I've had 11 recurrences since then, and now on my second challenge with Sutent, I had a significant response after only a couple of months. And Sutent probably went into phase 1 clinical trials in 1996. And without the people back then willing to participate in a phase 1 trial of a completely unknown drug, I wouldn't have had the great response that I've had now twice with that. So I would hope that our talk today will maybe spark an interest in learning about and perhaps participating in clinical trials if you can.
Yeah. And I have one other question from Lauren that fits right in. She asked if all of Gary's clinical trials had been helpful, and no, they haven't. And that's been true also with the FDA approved drugs.
Absolutely.
And in fact, the worst toxicity he had was with an FDA approved drug. So no, they come with no guarantee. It's, you know, you do want to be thoughtful and make sure it's good medicine, but right now there's no biomarkers for any of the kidney cancer drugs. So everything we take, we're taking with our fingers crossed.
Right.
So, but, you know, hopefully almost all of the new trials, they are trying to get biomarkers. So hopefully we're helping the next generation of kidney cancer patients be able to take drugs and know a little bit more about whether they might work.
I think it's important to remember that without the participation of patients like us, none of our current treatments would be available, and more importantly, there'll be no advances for future patients.
So I think that's about our time. If you have other questions, be sure and enter them on the website, and I'll try to get back to them. And I hope some of the people out there who are interested in trials will join our Smart Patients group, which is a lot of interaction. It's been great to have this chance to get to know people from Judy Nicholson. I'm sure that we're going to continue to be in touch and involved, but it's nice we're all working together. So
we'd like to thank the Judy Nicholson Foundation for giving us this opportunity to talk about clinical trials, because we both believe they're very important.
Yes. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.